As people are just joining, let me quickly start with outlook of what we're going to be talking about today. This is one of our core webinars on behavioral pricing and strategies for driving profitable consumer behavior. And we're going to learn a lot about the predictability or unpredictability of consumers and buyers. We'll go through some examples. I think we have quite a few very interesting case examples, anecdotes, but also really quantitative examples today. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about that in the session. As always, if you have questions, please send them in the Q&A or in the chat. I'm happy to answer them at the end of the webinar. And we will be also answering questions throughout in the chat itself. So do let us know if you have anything you want to know. If you go to the next slide, Ingo, I will quickly get the intro out of the way. So Ingo is our co-founder and managing director at Buynomics. He has over 13 years experience in pricing and has also developed the Buynomics method. And he will be basically guiding you through this webinar today. And I'm Paul. I'm leading the sales team at Buynomics. If you want to work with us, if you want to find more about us as a company, I'm the first person to speak to. So do feel free to send me an email or send me a message in the chat. And about Buynomics on the next slide, Ingo, just a quick intro. We are a software provider for better pricing and revenue management decisions. So be it in the telecommunications industry, in the consumer goods industry, we help you get better results with the data that you have and basically answering more questions in a single source of truth and help you be better and faster at it. That's basically Buynomics in a nutshell, and we'll actually see it very shortly also in our webinar. So Ingo, I think now we're at the interesting part, and that's when you take over, right?
Okay, thanks, Paul. I hope I can live up to the expectations. So also warm welcome from my side. I'll be leading through most part of the talk. I think we have today an interesting topic, behavioral pricing, super relevant for the field. And I think we have something interesting to contribute to the topic. Particularly, and that's, I would say, the core of our angle is how to make it work in practice, and so for pricing managers, how to make it work also for revenue optimization and other topics that we're dealing with. That will be I would say, like the angle that we're taking at the topic. But before we do that, let's just get some of the basics out of the way, so that we have a common understanding of what we are talking about. And I think the starting point has to be, why is there even something like behavioral economics, behavioral pricing, more specifically what we're talking about? And I think the core reason is it's because it's really difficult to be rational. Being rational is really the foundation of lots of even what we do in pricing. So when we talk about demand function, when we use concepts like price elasticity, for example, they always have, to some extent, the implicit assumption of rationality, which you need to get to like smooth demand function and be able to compute with them. That's typically the assumption, but in reality, it's really, really difficult to be rational. And I think this is like one of the standard examples here. If you look at the two errors, even if you know that they have the same length, because of this optical illusion with the errors at the end, it's really difficult to actually see that they have the same length. And there are many examples in pricing. Say one of the most prominent one, for example, price threshold. Even so, we know that 9.99 and 10 euros is pretty much the same thing. It's really difficult to actually see that and behave accordingly if you are presented with certain price thresholds in your decisions. But, and this is something we'll come back to, it's still for pricing professionals important to understand how, knowing that things like price thresholds exist, knowing how to best work with them and use them in practice. And that's essentially what we'll be talking about today. So with this intro, just very quickly, what's so special about irrationality, or why is there the topic of behavioral pricing? And I think it's because there are two types of people. So there's homo economicus, as I already hinted, which is the foundation for much of microeconomics, and with that, lots of stuff we use in pricing, like price elasticity, demand functions, and many other things. And it typically assumes that people are rational in their decision making. So, for example, they're not influenced by irrelevant alternatives. If someone prefers product A over product B and B over C, that person also has to prefer product A over product C. So there are all kinds of assumptions on how people make decisions, but we know, even looking at ourselves, that very often it's really difficult to be rational. So Homo sapiens, so real people, are often violate, and we'll have a look at some of these examples, violate these assumptions you need for rationality. And one of the core reasons for that is that we, instead of like being rational, means you have to solve often if you're faced with a large offer, hundreds of alternatives, you actually need to go through the alternatives, make a rational decision, evaluate each one of them. And instead of that, we often work with simplifying heuristics, and we take shortcuts in our decision making, and that's where lots of these behaviors come from. And I would say that there's a very rich literature on the subject. Probably Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, is one of the most prominent. I highly recommend reading that book and all of the others that we list here if you're interested in the field. And I think what characterizes the field is that it's very rich in the anecdotes on different effects, things like substitution. So instead of solving a difficult problem, like selecting your best product that best fits to your needs, out of 100 products, you substitute it with a much simpler challenge when you only look at maybe, for example, if you're looking at Amazon and you're looking for something like a USB drive, you don't go through the hundreds of options that you have, but you only look at maybe the first 2 or 3, make a choice. And that's a simplifying heuristic in your decision making, which we all do. And essentially, behavioral pricing is then the question of how can suppliers, how can retailers, but also manufacturers use that decision making, that simplifying decision making for their own needs, for their own profit optimization or other things that they're interested in. And that's really the field. And just to conclude this part, from our experience, as I said, the way it's presented in most cases, it's very, very anecdotal. So there are all of these different examples. We'll take one here and highlight what we mean that are presented, but it's difficult then to make that useful in the day-to-day work for pricing professionals. And that's what we want to discuss. And I'll highlight this with a very prominent example that probably most of us already know. And it's the question of a decoy product. And it works particularly well in contexts where it's difficult for most people to say or to know for themselves what the right decision is. So in this example, you have 2 products. So you're in the business of buying a wine bottle. So you have a cheap wine bottle or a cheaper wine bottle for 10 euros and a more expensive wine bottle at 30 euros. And most people, at least in the experiment in which this was presented, in this case, chose the cheaper bottle. So 60% bought the cheaper bottle, 40% went for the more expensive one. So this is because most people are, particularly if you're difficult to understand what the needs are or to assess the quality of the 2 wine bottles, would go for the cheaper one because it's less likely to make a mistake here by buying the cheaper one. So this is a starting position. And now what happens? A 3rd bottle is added to the offer. So the vendor here offered a 3rd bottle at 50 euros. And what that does is essentially it's a decoy, and it serves to make the middle bottle appear a bit cheaper. So now you have the 30 euro bottle, the the 10 euro bottle, 30 euro bottle as before, and you have the 50, and now the previously most expensive one doesn't look this expensive anymore. And what that means is that you would, if everyone now was actually rational, you would expect that some of the people who previously went for the cheap bottle would now go to the expensive bottle, and some of the people who went for the previously more expensive bottle would now go to the really expensive bottle. But that's not what happens. So what really happens is that now you have in this experiment 36% going for the cheaper instead of 60% before. You have, instead of 40% previously, 59 going to the middle bottle and 5% going to the most expensive one. And this is what we said previously, what rationality is. This is a violation of rational behavior, because people who previously preferred A over B now prefer B over A, because there is this decoy, and B looks more reasonably priced than previously. So that's something that someone who's rational wouldn't do. If you prefer A over B, you would always prefer A over B, regardless of this decoy product here. But that's not what real people do. So you can use this effect. For example, you can introduce this bottle C to move people from the cheaper bottle to the previously more expensive one. And that's something we often see in many offers that are being presented in software, or when you, for example, look at offers online. Most of them have don't have two, but they have 3 or 4 offers. And in many of these cases, you have something really expensive that almost no one buys, and it primarily serves to make the middle one more attractive and move people from the cheaper one to the middle option here. So this is I would say like a very prominent, probably most of you already know that, example of how behavioral pricing works. But the question now is, how can we fully understand this situation, and how can we also make this useful for our day-to-day pricing work? So and what we mean by that is, I think in the first step, it's important to understand what would someone rational do. So if we have, let's say in these cases, we have something like the quality or the utility of the different wine bottles, and someone like Commander Data, who is rational, if everyone was that, you would, as I said before, you would have some customers move from the cheap bottle. I think previously 60% goes down to 55. So 5% go to the more expensive bottle. And of the other case, we had previously 40%. So here also 3% points go to the more expensive bottle. So you have movements from A to C and from B to C, but you don't have movements from A to B. That's what rationality means. And you would have an outcome like this. What we observed on the previous slide, what happens with real people, is that you have this movement. So the behavioral effect is effectively this minus 90%, the plus 22% in the middle. So the middle bottle, the bottle B here, has 22% more than percentage points than it should have. And the bottle C in this case, because also this one loses a bit to the middle option, has fewer sales than it should have if everyone was rational. So with this, we can actually quantify the behavioral effect, and we could make that actually useful for maybe the best way to price is not 10, 30, 50 euros, but it might be 10, 40, 50 euros. So some other pricing points could be much more profitable than the ones that were used in this example. Just to highlight what I mean here, let me just switch my screen. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Paul, do you see my browser now?
Yeah.
So what we did here is we rebuilt essentially the situation we had previously with the wine bottle. So we have the good wine, the better wine, and we'll add later, it's not shown to the customers yet, the best wine here. And we have a good quality, here we have the better quality, and here we have the best quality. And we're not using any behavioral effects. So everyone we're showing this to is behaving fully, it's fully rational. We have the prices 10, 30 euros. And what we do is we show this, this is, by the way, our platform, we show this to 1,000 virtual shoppers. And in this case, they're all behaving as if they were completely rational. So there's no, you can't fool them with a decoy. So they will always, if they prefer A over B, they will also prefer A over B if you show them the product C as well. And you see exactly these effects that we have here. And you can also see, for example, if you made this one a bit more expensive, you would see if we went from 10 euros to 11 euros, that we would lose some sales here and would gain some of the sales in this other product here as well. So you can also already see what happens if you have movements and you have the 40% for the better and you have the 60% for the good, for the cheap product. For the good product, we have the 60%, and for the better product, we have the 40% market share. If we now add the third product, still no behavioral effect. We see that we get what we showed in the slides here. So we're seeing these market shares here. We have the about 7-8% for the best product. 37 for the better, and for the good one, it's 55. So exactly what we showed on the slide. And you see that these people here behave the way that they should under full rationality. And what we now can do, we can add this behavioral effect. So people now have a preference for the middle option, what we showed before, which is here in this case, identical to the decoy effect. And we see that we now have the market share, so only 5, what we had on the slide, 5 for the best product, 36 for the good, and the 59 for the better product. So we see exactly the effects. And for example, we could now ask ourselves, are we actually here in the best price, in the optimum, or for example, could we become more profitable if we change the prices here in this case? So this one wouldn't make sense. You would actually lose profit, but you, for example, could think of making the middle one a bit cheaper. So, but not much. So we're already close to the optimum. But with this, you can see by moving the price with and without the behavioral effects that you could probably improve your profitability just a little bit. And just to look again at the 3 cases, let me just switch this here. If we look at that all together, the 3 cases, we see the sales in the 3 examples that we saw. So the initial one, good and better, with these sales, and then we introduced the third bottle, the best bottle, but without the behavioral effects. We see that we sell a few more units. Of course, we sell in revenue somewhat better because we're adding the more expensive wine, and we're also then with the behavioral effect moving more customers from the good to the better product. And we see that we have revenues here of 12,000, in this case of 9,000. So that's about 33% better than in the initial situation. And compared to the case where we don't see the behavioral effect, I think it's about 17% more revenue. So we can see how much it's worth, how much benefit we get from being able to exploit such behavioral effects in this case. So, and I think that's really how it makes sense to think about these cases, that we understand what the addition is of the behavioral effect. And in this case, once this is understood, also how to make use of it, how to use it to with and without the effect, or of course the effect in reality always applies, but understand how to best deploy these behavioral effects once they have been properly quantified and understood. And I think that's one thing. And another thing that we often see, or before we do that, I think there are a number of cases. We now looked at here the price threshold effect, number 4, but there are many more effects that can be modeled in a similar way. For example, thinking about anchor products that you show to your customers, if you reduce the price here from $12.99 to $9.99, for example, or if you have something like endowment effect, where you give something for free that can be quantified. You have something like reference prices, or what we often see, particularly in online offers, is that some products or some alternatives are highlighted. So for example, here you have best value for money, and many other effects we can actually quantify and then make useful for the users of our solution, as we showed in the previous example. So there are many of these effects, and we're adding more to the solution. I think one other thing that's really important that we also see quite frequently when we work or look at, for example, survey results from conjoints or other sources, you often see that you have certain effects in a survey that are much stronger than or very different from how they turn out in reality. And this itself is also, I would say, a behavioral effect, in the sense that the way that many surveys are conducted is very different from the reality in which products are sold. So here's an extreme example. So in the survey, you have just 3 products, super focused on what you want to choose. Whereas in reality, you never see these 3 products next to each other. Here in this example, they're sorted by manufacturer. So it's a very different situation than what you have in the survey, and that needs to be considered when applying the findings from the surveys. And I think we have experience in doing that, but you cannot really apply the survey results in a one-to-one way to the specific sales situation. And just to highlight, I want to show this example. It's a different context, but something very typical. So we have here from a survey, I think it was a Granger experiment, where people were asked, would you buy a certain chocolate snack at different price points? For example, here ranging from 50 cents. And they asked, so would you buy this chocolate snack at 50 cents, 60 cents, and so on? So if you increase the price, you lose more people. And the particular thing about this is you have a massive price threshold as you go from 90 cents to €1 here of 35%, which is really strong. And you can see, if you look at the curve here, that it's fairly linear up here. Then you have this price threshold, massive effect, and then it's again about linear with the same, pretty much the same slope as up here. If you then compare this to the actual sales of the product, so in every dot here is the weekly sales volume at different price levels here, you see that the you don't have this massive price threshold here. If you do the analysis properly, you do see a price threshold, but one that's much weaker. And the reason for that is that in reality, or in the survey, the question was really focused on this one chocolate snack. And the question was, would you buy this at 60 cent, 70 cent, 80 cent, 90 cent, €1? And in reality, the question is not, do I buy this or nothing? But in reality, the question is, do I buy this snack? And for most people, or do I buy something else? So the price threshold for this particular product becomes much less important in the real context when people stand in front of a shelf and they are choosing from a dozen or a few dozen alternatives. So, and that's really important to keep in mind when you're working in practice or trying to or you try to use these behavioral effects, is that in reality they can look very different, because the situation in which people make decisions is very different from the more clean laboratory environment in which many of the typical pricing surveys are conducted, like Granger, Van Westendorp, and others. So this is always important, and there are certain techniques to deal with this challenge. All right, I think we're already getting to the end, but I think before we go to the questions and then to the weekend, there's, I think, one example that concerns behavioral pricing in B2B that I saw yesterday on LinkedIn. And if you're wondering if there's also behavioral effects or behavioral pricing in B2B, I think this is a really good example. So here's, I think it's a Canadian restaurant in Toronto that renamed its it's meals after office supplies here. So instead of a burger, you have basic steel stapler, mini dry erase whiteboard, and so on, to make it easier for customers to expense their lunch. And I think this is a fun example, but it's also important to note that behavior is really about understanding the needs and the heuristics of your customer. And in the B2B context, you also have behavioral effects if you wonder, but they have to be tailored to the organization, not necessarily to the Homo sapiens in this case. And with that, I'll hand over to Paul and the Q&A part.
Yeah, perfect. To the audience, feel free to add more questions in the chat. We already have 2 here and some in the Q&A. So the first question was around explaining how this methodology is different from conjoint analyses. I already answered a little bit. I mean, conjoints are based on primary research with consumer panels, and we are basically using actual sales. But do you want to maybe add to that? I mean, we had some interesting slides here that demonstrated how limited conjoint analyses are around price thresholds, but also in terms of what context they can actually include.
So I would say most of the surveys or studies that we see, they have advantages and disadvantages, and there are some, of course, some disadvantages in a conjoint. And one of them we highlighted here, that they are conducted in a very different setting from the actual sales situation, but they also have a number of advantages, right? So you can show your respondents offers in combinations at prices that you don't want to do in the real world, because it's maybe they're too far away from the status quo, and it would be too costly to do these extreme experiments. And that's something you can do, but what's important is that you properly integrate the findings into your real world model, right? So essentially what you get is a measurement of customer behavior. And as we had, for example, with the chocolate example, that customer behavior, if you show someone only a single product, a price threshold is much larger than when a customer can choose between dozens of products. And that's, for example, something which in our solution, these virtual shoppers do. If you only show them the single chocolate bar, you will see a price threshold of these 30%. If you show them this chocolate bar in the context of a dozen or 2 dozen other chocolate bars or alternatives, then the price threshold becomes much weaker. And that's essentially how you need to use these insights, for example, with a model that like the one that we're using, to be able to properly put these insights into context.
Yeah, and that connects nicely to another question that Avri posted, which asks, okay, does the data therefore show that there's no clean 0.99 effect, i.e. no big difference between 99 cents and €1 or £1 dollar outside of experiments? I think it depends, right, on the context.
Yes. No. So the effect is there, and as said in the data, it's also there, but it's much weaker. So it's not 35%. It's, I don't know the exact number now, maybe 4 or 5%. The effect is there, but if you have it in a large portfolio, the effect is much weaker, because people don't choose only between buying this product and nothing, but they choose most of the time between this product and other alternatives. And that reduces the relevance of that effect. It's still there, but it's much weaker in the context of many products.
Yeah, I think, I remember last year we were at a conference, and inflation was the hot topic, of course. And a lot of people were very worried about crossing price thresholds and warning about it, and really said this is going to change the game. But I think in the end, it really did not come to fruition as much as people were expecting, because they were indeed relying on analyses like that.
Yeah, So the full answer is always it depends, right? So it's difficult like to make a general statement, but we saw in many cases that it was, and our solution here predicted it was much less dangerous to cross certain price thresholds than anticipated or than you would expect by just looking at these Gabor, Granger, Van Dessendorp, and other surveys.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So Paul is asking another question. Can you use this method to identify pricing hierarchies and levels at a category level?
The short answer is yes. We would, if it's more specific than that, so you can use the tool for pricing, price architectures, and all of these questions. So the general answer is yes. We would have to understand your question specifically to give like a more detailed answer. Happy to do this afterwards.
All right. Perfect. If there's no further questions in the chat, maybe we can move to the next slide, just highlighting our next few webinars. We have a couple of interesting ones for one on pricing strategy on at the end of March, and before that, for our followers in the telecoms industry, we have an interesting one. And for everyone interested really in conjoint analyses, and I saw some interesting comments around that as well, about how AI is revolutionizing pricing and product optimization and telecommunications. And I will actually post both of these links in the chat right now, so you can already register if you're interested in either one. And I think it will be quite a nice continuation of the conversation today. Around conjoints, specifically around telco, of course, but then also around the role of pricing tools and data in your strategy. So stay tuned for those, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks, and have a great weekend.